My husband and his sister went to a business dinner, leaving me with the new maid who supposedly spoke zero English. As soon as the car pulled away, she dropped the broom, looked me in the eye, and spoke in perfect English. "Ma'am, do not eat the soup they left in the fridge." What I discovered next made my blood ran cold. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The grandfather clock in our foyer chimed 7 times as I watched Conrad adjust his tie in the hallway mirror. 35 years of marriage, and I still felt that familiar flutter when he dressed for important occasions. Tonight was no different. He looked distinguished in his navy suit, silver hair perfectly combed, the picture of success that had first attracted me all those years ago. "The reservation is at 8:30, he said without looking at me, his voice carrying that businesslike tone he'd adopted more frequently lately. "Bridget is already in the car." I nodded, smoothing down my silk blouse. These business dinners had become routine over the past few months. Conrad's import company was expanding, he'd explained, and his sister Bridget had become an invaluable partner. I rarely questioned the details anymore. Financial matters had always been Conrad's domain, and at 61, I'd grown comfortable letting him handle such complexities. Through the window, I could see Bridget's silhouette in the passenger seat of Conrad's Mercedes. Even from a distance, I could sense her impatience in the way she checked her watch. My sister-in-law had never been particularly warm toward me, but lately, her cold efficiency felt more pronounced. She spoke to me in clipped sentences, always seeming to calculate something behind her pale blue eyes. "Don't wait up," Conrad added, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "These discussions tend to run late." "Of course." The words came automatically. I'd been saying them for months now, these mysterious business dinners that excluded me entirely. Part of me wondered why I was never invited, but asking felt petty. Conrad worked so hard to provide for us, to maintain the beautiful life we'd built in our Magnolia Drive mansion. The front door closed with a soft click, followed by the purr of the Mercedes engine fading into the distance. Suddenly, our sprawling home felt enormous and empty. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock seemed louder now, echoing through rooms filled with antique furniture and family photographs spanning decades of what I'd believed was a happy marriage. I made my way to the kitchen, thinking I might prepare some tea before settling in with a book. The Italian marble countertops gleamed under the pendant lights, and everything was in its proper place, exactly how our housekeeper Jessa had left it before retiring to her quarters above the garage. Jessa had been with us for only 2 months, but she'd proven invaluable. A quiet woman in her 40s with kind dark eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. She'd come highly recommended by an agency Bridget had suggested. Her English was practically non-existent, or so we'd believed, but she communicated through gestures, and her work spoke volumes. The house had never been cleaner. Meals appeared as if by magic, and she moved through our home like a gentle ghost, never intrusive, always helpful. I was reaching for the kettle when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Jessa appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her simple gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. She carried a dust cloth, though I noticed she wasn't actually cleaning anything. "Buenas noches, señora," she said softly, then paused, glancing toward the front windows where the driveway lay empty. I smiled at her. "Good evening, Jessa. You can rest now. They've gone to their dinner." She nodded, but instead of leaving, she remained in the doorway, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Something in her posture seemed different tonight, less submissive, more alert. Her eyes kept darting to the windows, as if ensuring we were truly alone. Then she did something that made my blood turn cold. She set down her dust cloth on the kitchen island, looked directly into my eyes, and spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Ma'am, do not eat the soup they left in the refrigerator." The kettle slipped from my hands, clattering against the marble countertop. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The quiet, non-English speaking housekeeper I'd known for 2 months had just delivered a warning in flawless American English. What did you just say? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Jessa stepped closer, her expression serious but not unkind. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to listen to me carefully. My name is Jessa Martinez, and I speak English perfectly. I've been pretending not to understand for the past 2 months because I was hired to spy on you. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. Spy on me? I don't understand. Your sister-in-law, Bridget, hired me through an agency. But not the kind of agency you think. Jessa's voice was calm but urgent. She paid me $800 a week to report everything you did, everything you said, every detail of your daily routine. She wanted to know about your habits, your health, your mental state. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's impossible. Bridget recommended you, yes, but she wouldn't. She's family. Ma'am, please sit down. Jessa gestured to one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. I remained standing, my legs feeling unsteady, but my spine straight. 35 years of being Conrad's wife had taught me to face difficult news with dignity, even when my world was crumbling. Tell me. Jessa took a deep breath. For the past 2 months, I've been listening to conversations between your husband and his sister. Conversations they thought I couldn't understand, because they believed I didn't speak English. Mrs. Whitmore, they're planning something terrible. What kind of terrible? The words felt foreign in my mouth, as if I were speaking a language I'd never learned. They want to have you declared mentally incompetent. They've been slowly introducing substances into your food, not enough to harm you physically, but enough to make you appear confused, forgetful, unstable. Jessa's eyes filled with something that looked like genuine concern. Tonight's soup contains a powerful laxative that will make you violently ill. Tomorrow, they plan to call a doctor who's already been paid to sign papers declaring you unfit to manage your own affairs. The kitchen spun around me. I gripped the counter harder, my knuckles white against the dark stone. Why would they do this? Conrad loves me. We've been married for 35 years. Jessa's expression softened with what looked like pity. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is in serious financial trouble. His business is failing, and he owes people who don't accept late payments. Bridget has gambling debts that have put her in danger. Together, they see your inheritance as their only way out. My inheritance? I shook my head. My parents died over 30 years ago. There's nothing left. Your family's properties, the investments, the trust fund, it all comes to nearly $3 million. Your husband has been managing it all these years, but legally it belongs to you. If something happened to you, or if you were declared incompetent, Conrad would gain complete control. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, each toll hitting me like a physical blow. 8 o'clock. They'd been gone for 30 minutes. How long did I have before they returned? How long had I been living in this elaborate lie? Why are you telling me this? I finally managed to ask. If Bridget hired you to spy on me, why betray her now? Jessa looked down at her hands, then back up at me. Because I've watched you for 2 months, Mrs. Whitmore. You're kind to everyone. You treat me with respect, even though you think I can't understand you. You leave me little notes with drawings when you want something done, and you always say please and thank you, even though you don't think I understand the words. She paused, her voice growing stronger. But more than that, I've seen how they treat you, the way your husband dismisses your opinions, how your sister-in-law rolls her eyes when you speak, the way they've slowly isolated you from friends, convinced you that you're not capable of understanding complicated matters. What they're doing isn't just about money, it's about power, and I won't be part of destroying a good person. I stood there in my beautiful kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd thought was perfect, and realized that everything I believed about my marriage, my family, my very existence had been a carefully constructed lie. The soup in the refrigerator, which I'd planned to heat up for a late dinner, suddenly seemed like a weapon pointed at my heart. What do I do? The question came out broken, desperate. Jessa stepped closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. First, we make sure that soup gets disposed of where they'll never know it wasn't consumed. Second, we start documenting everything. And third, Mrs. Whitmore, you need to understand that this is just the beginning. What I've told you tonight is only part of what they've been planning. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway made us both freeze. Car headlights swept across the kitchen windows. They're back, Jessa whispered, immediately switching back to her subservient posture. Act normal. Don't let them suspect anything has changed. As I heard the familiar sound of Conrad's key in the front door, I realized that my entire life had just shifted on its axis. The man I'd loved and trusted for 35 years, the sister-in-law I'd tolerated and tried to please, they weren't just strangers, they were my enemies. How was the restaurant? I asked Conrad as he hung his coat in the hallway closet, my voice surprisingly steady considering my hands were trembling beneath the kitchen island where he couldn't see them. Fine, he replied without elaboration, loosening his tie. Productive meeting. You should get some rest, Antoinette. You look tired. Bridget swept past him into the living room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Long day tomorrow, she added over her shoulder. Conrad mentioned you might want to see Dr. Harrison about those memory issues we discussed. Memory issues? My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't mentioned any memory problems to either of them. I'm feeling fine, actually. Of course you are, dear. Conrad's tone was patronizing in a way I'd never noticed before, or perhaps I'd simply accepted it as normal. But prevention is better than cure, don't you think? They exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction too long. In the past, I would have dismissed it as sibling communication. Now, it felt loaded with meaning I was only beginning to understand. I think I'll have some of that mushroom soup before bed, Conrad said, heading toward the kitchen. Long day tomorrow, and I need something settling for my stomach. Actually, I said quickly, I finished it earlier. I was hungrier than I thought. Another look passed between them, this one sharper. Bridget's perfectly manicured eyebrows drew together in the faintest frown. All of it? Conrad asked. There was nearly a full container. I heated it twice. You know how I am when I'm nervous about being alone. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to my ears. I suppose I'll feel it tomorrow. Conrad's expression relaxed into what I now recognized as satisfaction. Well, make sure you stay hydrated. Food poisoning can be quite dehydrating. Food poisoning. The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. They were expecting me to be violently ill tomorrow, had probably already scheduled the doctor's visit around my anticipated suffering. I think I'll turn in now, I said, moving toward the stairs. Good night. Good night, dear, Conrad called after me, his voice warm with what I now understood was anticipation. I made it to my bedroom and closed the door before my legs gave out. I sank onto the edge of my bed, still wearing the silk blouse and pearls I'd put on hours ago when my biggest concern was whether Conrad would notice I'd had my hair done. Now those worries seemed laughably trivial compared to the realization that my husband and sister-in-law were actively plotting against me. A soft knock on my door made me freeze. Mrs. Whitmore? Jessa's voice, back to the hesitant, accented English she'd perfected. I brought fresh towels. Come in. Jessa entered with an armload of towels that were clearly just a prop. She moved to my ensuite bathroom, and I heard the soft sound of linens being arranged. When she emerged, she gestured toward the bathroom and mouthed silently, "Talk in there. Water running." I followed her into the marble-lined space that had always been my sanctuary. Jessa turned on the taps in both the sink and the large soaking tub, creating enough white noise to mask our conversation. They bought it, she whispered, about the soup. But now we have a bigger problem. I heard them talking after they came back. What did they say? They've moved up their timeline. Dr. Harrison, The doctor they've bribed, he's coming here tomorrow afternoon. They're going to tell him you've been acting erratically, forgetting things, having episodes. When he examines you and you're not sick from the soup they expected, they'll claim you're having a lucid interval but that your condition is degenerative. I gripped the edge of the marble sink. Can they really do that? Have me declared incompetent based on one doctor's opinion? With the right documentation, yes. And Mrs. Whitmore, they have documentation. Bridget has been forging medical records for months. She has a friend who works at a medical records company, someone with gambling debts who needed money. They've created an entire fictional medical history for you. The beautiful bathroom suddenly felt like a cage. The mirrors reflected my pale face from multiple angles, showing me a woman who looked every one of her 61 years and more. Had I really been so blind to what was happening around me? There's something else, Jessa continued, her voice dropping even lower. About why Bridget hired me specifically. What do you mean? I wasn't chosen at random from an agency. Bridget sought me out because of my background. Before I became a housekeeper, I worked for a private investigation firm. I know how to install surveillance equipment, how to copy documents, how to gather evidence without being detected. My knees went weak. Surveillance equipment? In my own home? Small cameras in the common areas, listening devices in your bedroom and study. They've been recording you for weeks, waiting for moments they could take out of context to use against you. A stumble when you got up too fast becomes evidence of neurological problems. Forgetting where you put your reading glasses becomes proof of memory loss. The violation felt worse than anything I'd experienced. Not just the loss of privacy, but the calculating cruelty of it. They'd been watching me like a specimen, cataloging my human moments to use as weapons. But if you know how to do these things, I said slowly, does that mean you can undo them? Yes. And more than that, Mrs. Whitmore, I can turn their own system against them. They hired someone with the skills to destroy you, but those same skills can save you. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since this nightmare began. What do you mean? Jessa pulled a small device from her pocket, something that looked like a phone charger but felt different when she placed it in my palm. This is a recording device, military grade, undetectable. While they've been recording you, I've been recording them. Every conversation, every phone call, every moment when they thought they were safe. You've been recording everything? For 6 weeks now. I have Bridget admitting to forging medical records, Conrad discussing how to access your bank accounts, both of them planning exactly how to have you institutionalized. I have phone calls with the corrupt doctor, conversations with the medical records forger, even arguments about how to split your inheritance once they have control. The water continued running, a steady white noise that felt like the only stable thing in my shifting world. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed enough evidence to be absolutely certain we could stop them completely. 1 or 2 recordings could be dismissed or explained away. But what I have now... Jessa's eyes hardened with determination. What I have now will destroy them. What do they think you're reporting to Bridget? Exactly what they want to hear. That you're declining rapidly, becoming confused and forgetful. That you've been talking to yourself, leaving tasks half-finished, showing signs of paranoia and disorientation. I've been feeding them a fictional narrative about your mental deterioration while documenting their real conspiracy. I stared at this woman I'd thought I knew, realizing she'd been protecting me while I remained completely unaware of the danger. Jessa, I have to ask, what's your real motivation in all this? Why risk so much for someone you barely know? She was quiet for a long moment, the sound of running water filling the space between us. When she spoke, her voice carried a pain I hadn't heard before. Because 15 years ago, my mother went through exactly what they're planning for you. My stepfather and his daughter had her declared incompetent and institutionalized. She died in that place 18 months later, alone and branded as mentally ill. I was young and didn't understand the system well enough to stop it. I've carried that guilt every day since. The water blurred as tears filled my eyes. I'm so sorry. When Bridget approached me with this job, describing their plan, it was like watching my worst nightmare play out again. But this time, I have the skills and knowledge to fight back. This time, I can save someone. What happens next? Jessa turned off the taps, and the sudden silence felt profound. Tomorrow, when Dr. Harrison comes, you're going to give the performance of your life. You're going to appear exactly as confused and unstable as they claim you are. And while they think they're winning, we're going to spring our own trap. What kind of trap? The kind that will expose not just Conrad and Bridget, but the corrupt doctor and the medical records forger. A trap that will ensure they face serious criminal charges and can never hurt you or anyone else again. As we prepared to leave the bathroom, Jessa caught my arm gently. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do will change everything. Your marriage, your family relationships, probably your entire life. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the 35 years I'd spent trusting Conrad, the careful way I'd tried to earn Bridget's approval, the quiet life I'd built around being a supportive wife to a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat. My life has already changed, I said quietly. Now I'm just going to take control of it. But as we stepped back into my bedroom, both of us returning to our practiced roles as lady of the house and subservient housekeeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring revelations even more shocking than tonight's discoveries. Because if Conrad and Bridget were willing to go this far, what other secrets had they been keeping? And how deep did this conspiracy really go? The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight streamed through our bedroom's heavy curtains, casting familiar patterns across the Persian rug that had adorned our floor for over 2 decades. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything Jessa had revealed, but I forced myself to follow my usual routine. Conrad could not suspect that anything had changed. I found him in the breakfast nook, reading the Wall Street Journal while sipping his morning coffee. He looked up when I entered, and I caught something in his expression, a calculating assessment, as if he were taking my mental temperature. "Good morning, darling," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" "A bit tired," I replied, which was certainly true. My stomach was upset during the night. I think that soup didn't agree with me after all. His eyes sharpened with interest, though he tried to hide it behind concern. "Oh, that's unfortunate. Perhaps we should have Dr. Morrison take a look at you." Doctor. Morrison had been our family physician for 15 years. A kind man who actually cared about his patients. Not the corrupt Dr. Harrison they'd arranged to evaluate me this afternoon. "I'm sure it will pass," I said carefully. Bridget appeared in the doorway, already dressed in one of her expensive business suits. She'd been staying with us for the past 3 weeks, ostensibly while her house underwent renovation. Now I understood the real reason for her extended visit. She needed to be here to witness my supposed breakdown firsthand. "Any word from Dr. Harrison about this afternoon?" she asked Conrad, not bothering to lower her voice. The casualness with which she discussed my medical appointment without including me in the conversation was telling. "He'll be here at 3 o'clock, Conrad replied, then turned to me with false solicitude. "Darling, I've arranged for a specialist to examine you. Dr. Harrison comes highly recommended for cognitive assessments." The way he said cognitive assessments made my skin crawl. They weren't even pretending anymore that this was about my physical health. This was the beginning of their plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. "Is that really necessary?" I asked, allowing a note of confusion to enter my voice. "I feel fine, just a bit under the weather." "Better safe than sorry," Bridget interjected smoothly. "At our age, we can't be too careful about these things." Our age. Bridget was 57, 4 years younger than me. But she spoke as if we were both ancient and failing, when in reality, I was in excellent health, or had been, before learning that my closest family members were poisoning me. After breakfast, I retreated to my study, a small room off the main hallway that had always been my private sanctuary. Conrad rarely entered it, dismissing my books and correspondence as women's interests not worthy of his attention. Now, I wondered if that dismissal had been strategic, a way to keep me isolated in pursuits that wouldn't threaten his control. I was pretending to read when Jessa knocked softly and entered with her cleaning supplies. To anyone watching, she was simply dusting the bookshelves, but when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I accessed their email accounts last night," she whispered without looking at me, her hands moving efficiently across the mahogany shelves. "What I found is worse than we thought." My heart clenched. How could it be worse? They've already selected a facility, Bridgewood Manor, about 2 hours north of here. It's a private psychiatric hospital that specializes in difficult cases, wealthy families who want problematic relatives to disappear quietly. The book trembled in my hands. Disappear? Mrs. Whitmore, patients admitted to Bridgewood under those circumstances rarely leave. The care is minimal, the oversight is non-existent, and the staff is paid well to look the other way. Conrad has already wired a deposit of $50,000 to secure your placement. $50,000. He'd spent more on my potential imprisonment than most people earned in a year, and he'd done it with money that was technically mine. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. "There's more," Jessa continued, her voice growing even quieter. "I found correspondence with a lawyer about updating your will. Once you're declared incompetent, Conrad will have power of attorney. The first thing he plans to do is change your will to leave everything to him, with provisions for Bridget." I set the book down carefully, afraid I might snap it in half. "What about the recordings you've been making? Can we stop this?" "Yes, but we need them to incriminate themselves completely. Right now, we have conspiracy, fraud, and attempted abuse of an elderly person. But I want to catch them in the act of medical fraud and bribery. When Dr. Harrison arrives, I need you to do exactly as I say." "What do you want me to do?" Jessa moved to dust the lamp near my chair, bringing her closer so she could speak directly into my ear. "When he examines you, you're going to appear exactly as confused and disoriented as they claim you are. But you're also going to say specific things that will prove you're being coerced." "What kind of things?" "You're going to mention seeing people who aren't there, but you're going to describe them in ways that make it clear you're being coached. You're going to forget recent events, but remember old ones with suspicious clarity. Most importantly, you're going to ask Dr. Harrison questions that will force him to reveal he's been briefed about your case before examining you." The plan was risky, but I could see the logic. If we could prove that Dr. Harrison had predetermined his diagnosis, we could expose the entire conspiracy. What if he's more careful than that? Then we have backup plans. I've installed micro cameras in this room and the living room where he'll conduct his examination. Everything will be recorded. And Mrs. Whitmore. She paused in her dusting, meeting my eyes for just a moment. "I've also contacted a real doctor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist who owes me a favor. She's agreed to conduct an independent evaluation of you tomorrow, assuming we can prevent today's planned abduction." Abduction. The word hit me like a physical blow. That's what this was, a planned kidnapping using medical authority as cover. If their plan succeeded, I would be forcibly committed to an institution where I might never be seen again. "How long have they been planning this?" I asked. "Based on the emails I found, at least 6 months. It started when Conrad's business began failing more seriously. Bridget approached him with the idea after she lost her house to gambling debts. They see you as their retirement plan." The door to my study opened suddenly, making us both freeze. Conrad appeared in the doorway, his expression pleasant, but his eyes watchful. "Everything all right in here?" he asked. I thought I heard voices. "Just reading aloud to myself," I said, forcing a smile. "You know how I sometimes do that when I'm trying to concentrate." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on Jessa, who had immediately resumed her dusting with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of invisibility. "Dr. Harrison will be here in a few hours," Conrad said. "Why don't you rest before then? I want you to be at your best for the examination." "At my best," meaning at my most confused and vulnerable. "Of course, dear." After Conrad left, Jessa and I remained silent for several minutes, both of us acutely aware of how close we'd come to discovery. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new urgency. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else you need to know about the timing of all this." "What do you mean?" "Your family's trust fund, the one your parents established, it has a specific provision. If you're declared mentally incompetent, the funds remain in trust but can be managed by your legal guardian. But if you die while competent, everything goes to Conrad as your husband. If you die after being declared incompetent, the money reverts to distant relatives your parents named as backup beneficiaries." The implications made me feel sick. So they need me alive but incapacitated. For now. But Mrs. Whitmore, institutions like Bridgewood, accidents happen. Patients with dementia wander off, have falls, develop sudden medical complications. Once you're committed, your life expectancy becomes negotiable. I gripped the arms of my chair, the reality of my situation finally hitting me completely. This wasn't just about money or control. This was about my survival. Conrad and Bridget weren't just planning to steal my inheritance. They were planning to eliminate me entirely, just slowly enough to avoid suspicion. "We have to stop them today," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever it takes." "We will," Jessa promised. "But Mrs. Whitmore, when this is over, when they're exposed and facing criminal charges, your entire life will change. Are you prepared to lose everything you've known for the past 35 years? I looked around my study, at the books I'd collected, the photographs of what I'd believed was a happy marriage, the comfortable life I'd built on what I now knew was a foundation of lies. Then I thought about the alternative, disappearing into an institution where I'd be at the mercy of people who saw me as nothing more than a profitable problem to manage. "I've already lost everything," I said quietly. "Now I'm just going to make sure they pay for taking it." As if summoned by my words, the grandfather clock in the foyer began to chime noon. 3 hours until Dr. Harrison arrived. 3 hours to prepare for what might be the most important performance of my life. Because if we failed, it might also be my last. At exactly 3 o'clock, Dr. Harrison's black sedan pulled into our circular driveway. I watched from my bedroom window as a tall, thin man in an expensive overcoat emerged, carrying a leather briefcase that looked more suited to a lawyer than a doctor. Even from a distance, something about his demeanor struck me as predatory rather than professional. Conrad greeted him at the front door with the enthusiasm of a man welcoming an old friend, rather than meeting a medical specialist for the first time. Their conversation was animated, punctuated by gestures toward the house's interior, and what looked suspiciously like an exchange of documents before they even stepped inside. I made my way downstairs slowly, deliberately appearing more frail than I felt. Jessa had coached me on the subtle signs of cognitive decline that would seem authentic to a casual observer, but obvious as performance to anyone looking closely. The goal was to give Dr. Harrison enough evidence to support his predetermined diagnosis, while creating a record that would later prove the examination was fraudulent. "Antoinette, dear," Conrad called as I entered the living room. "This is Dr. Harrison. He's here to conduct that evaluation we discussed." Dr. Harrison rose from the sofa, extending a manicured hand. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 50, with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your husband has told me so much about you." Already a red flag. A legitimate doctor conducting an independent evaluation wouldn't have discussed my case in detail with my husband beforehand. "Have we met before?" I asked, allowing confusion to color my voice. "You look familiar." "No, Mrs. Whitmore, this is our first meeting," Dr. Harrison replied smoothly. but I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Conrad. Perhaps you're thinking of someone else. Bridget appeared from the kitchen carrying a tea service with the efficiency of a hostess rather than the concern of a family member worried about my health. I thought you might like some refreshment before the examination, she said, setting the tray on the coffee table. I noticed that she'd prepared 4 cups, an interesting choice if this were truly a medical appointment. It suggested that both she and Conrad planned to be present throughout the evaluation, which would be highly unusual for a legitimate psychiatric assessment. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Harrison began, pulling out a tablet and stylus. I'd like to start with some simple questions to assess your current cognitive function. Are you comfortable with your husband and sister-in-law present, or would you prefer privacy? Oh, I don't mind, I said, though internally I was pleased that he'd essentially admitted to conducting an improper examination. They've been so worried about me lately. I'm sure they want to hear what you have to say. For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Harrison led me through what appeared to be a standard cognitive assessment. He asked me to remember lists of words, perform simple mathematical calculations, and identify common objects from pictures. I answered correctly, but slowly, occasionally pausing as if struggling to find the right response. But it was what happened between the formal questions that truly revealed the corruption at work. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Harrison said during one of these informal moments, your husband mentioned that you've been having episodes of disorientation. Can you tell me about those? I glanced at Conrad with apparent confusion. Episodes? I don't remember any episodes. When did I have episodes? Just last week, dear, Conrad said gently, his voice full of false concern. You forgot how to work the coffee maker. You stood in the kitchen for nearly an hour, just staring at it. This was news to me. I used our coffee maker every morning without difficulty, and no such incident had ever occurred. Conrad was inventing symptoms on the spot, and Dr. Harrison was accepting them without question. That must have been frightening, Dr. Harrison said to me, making notes on his tablet. Do you remember feeling confused about familiar objects? Sometimes, I said hesitantly, following Jessa's coaching to appear cooperative but uncertain. But I thought that was normal. Don't we all forget things sometimes? Some forgetfulness is normal, Dr. Harrison agreed, but what your family is describing suggests a more serious pattern. Again, he was treating Conrad and Bridget's claims as established fact, rather than allegations to be verified. A competent physician would have asked for specific details, requested medical records, or insisted on speaking with me alone to get my version of events. Doctor, I said, seizing an opportunity Jessa had prepared me for. Before we continue, could you tell me who referred you to my case? I like to know how my doctors find me. Dr. Harrison's pen stopped moving. Your husband contacted my office directly. But how did he know to contact you specifically? Do you specialize in cases like mine? A flush crept up Dr. Harrison's neck. I have experience with cognitive decline in elderly patients, yes. What kind of experience? And how did Conrad know about that experience? The questions were making Dr. Harrison visibly uncomfortable. Conrad jumped in quickly. Darling, Dr. Harrison comes highly recommended. Bridget suggested him based on her research. I turned to Bridget with apparent innocence. Research? What kind of research? Medical directories, Bridget said curtly. Online reviews. The usual things people do when seeking specialists. But I wasn't finished. Jessa had prepared me for this moment. Doctor, before you examine me further, could you tell me about your assessment criteria? I'd like to understand what you're looking for. Dr. Harrison glanced at Conrad again. Another telling sign. A legitimate physician would have been happy to explain his process to a patient. Mrs. Whitmore, the evaluation involves multiple factors: cognitive testing, behavioral observation, family history. Family history is important, I agreed. What specific family history are you working with? Because I should mention that my parents both lived well into their 80s with no cognitive decline. My grandmother was mentally sharp until she died at 93. This was true, and it directly contradicted any genetic predisposition to early dementia that they might try to claim. Dr. Harrison made more notes, but I could see him struggling to fit my actual family history into whatever narrative Conrad and Bridget had provided. Sometimes these conditions can appear without genetic predisposition, he said finally. Of course, I replied. But in those cases, wouldn't you want to rule out other causes first? Environmental factors, medication interactions, depression, vitamin deficiencies? There are so many reversible causes of cognitive symptoms. Dr. Harrison's discomfort was now obvious. A patient questioning his thoroughness shouldn't have rattled a competent physician, but his predetermined conclusions were being challenged by inconvenient facts. Conrad intervened again. Darling, let's let the doctor complete his examination. We don't want to take up too much of his valuable time. The phrase valuable time struck me as significant. It suggested a financial arrangement rather than a professional consultation. I filed that observation away for later. Of course, I said. But doctor, one more question. Given that cognitive decline can have so many different causes, what's your standard protocol for ruling out treatable conditions? Blood work? Brain imaging? Medication review? Those tests can be arranged if necessary, Dr. Harrison said vaguely. If necessary? Wouldn't they be necessary before making any definitive diagnosis? The silence that followed was telling. A legitimate physician would have enthusiastically agreed that comprehensive testing was essential. Dr. Harrison's reluctance to commit to proper medical procedures revealed that he had no intention of conducting a thorough evaluation. From my peripheral vision, I saw Jessa enter the room quietly, ostensibly to collect the tea service. But I knew she was positioned to capture everything on her hidden recording devices. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Harrison said, clearly eager to move away from procedural questions. Let's continue with the assessment. Can you tell me what year it is? 2023, I replied correctly. And who is the current president? I paused, pretending to think. That would be, oh, what's his name? The one who came after Obama. Mrs. Whitmore, Conrad said gently. Obama left office several years ago. We've had 2 presidents since then. I blinked in apparent confusion. 2? That can't be right. I remember Obama was president just. This was pure theater, but Dr. Harrison seized on it immediately, making vigorous notes. A real physician might have explored whether I was thinking of a different time frame or confused about something specific. Dr. Harrison simply recorded my response as evidence of cognitive decline. Mrs. Whitmore, he continued, can you tell me about your daily routine? Do you manage your own medications, handle your finances, drive a car? Conrad helps me with all of that, I said, which was unfortunately true. Over the years, he had gradually assumed control of every aspect of our lives. He's so much better with numbers and details. And that's been going on for how long? I pretended to think. Oh, years and years. Conrad has always been the smart one in our family. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly, as if my husband's financial control was evidence of my incapacity rather than a potential red flag for financial abuse. As the examination continued, I began to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about forging a few documents or bribing one doctor. They had created an entire false narrative about my mental state, complete with fabricated incidents, misrepresented family dynamics, and a predetermined conclusion that would justify my immediate institutionalization. But they had made one critical error. They had underestimated both my intelligence and my determination to survive. As Dr. Harrison prepared to conclude his examination, I knew that the next few minutes would determine whether I spent the rest of my life as a free woman or disappeared into the nightmare of Bridgewood Manor. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Harrison said, closing his tablet with an air of finality. Based on my examination today, I believe you're experiencing significant cognitive decline that requires immediate professional intervention." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Conrad leaned forward eagerly while Bridget maintained her mask of concerned family member, though I could see the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "What kind of intervention?" I asked, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. "I'm recommending immediate placement in a specialized care facility where you can receive round-the-clock monitoring and treatment, Dr. Sao," Harrison replied smoothly. "I've already contacted Bridgewood Manor. They have an opening, and I believe you would benefit from their specialized program." Already contacted. He'd arranged my institutionalization before even conducting his fraudulent examination. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "Today?" I asked with apparent confusion. "But I don't understand. I feel fine. Can't I just take some medicine?" "Mrs. Whitmore," Conrad said gently, taking my hand in his. "The doctor knows best. And this isn't permanent. Just until you're feeling better." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. We all knew that patients admitted to Bridgewood under these circumstances didn't come home. "I've prepared the necessary paperwork, Dr. E." Harrison continued, pulling documents from his briefcase. "With your husband's signature as your medical power of attorney, we can facilitate the transfer this afternoon." "Medical power of attorney?" I blinked in apparent confusion. When did I give Conrad medical power of attorney? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Conrad cleared his throat. "Darling, we discussed this months ago when you were having those episodes. You signed the papers yourself." This was news to me. I'd never signed any such document, which meant they'd either forged my signature or planned to do so now. "I don't remember signing anything." "That's exactly why this intervention is necessary," Dr. Harrison interjected. "Memory loss regarding important legal decisions is a serious symptom." The circular logic was infuriating. My inability to remember something that never happened was being used as proof of my incompetence. But I forced myself to remain in character, appearing confused and vulnerable while inwardly seething at their manipulation. "Doctor," I said hesitantly, "could I see the papers I supposedly signed? Maybe that would help me remember." Dr. Harrison's eyes flicked to Conrad. "Mrs. Whitmore, focusing on past confusion might agitate you further. Let's concentrate on getting you the help you need." Another red flag. A legitimate physician would have been happy to review previous medical decisions with a patient. His refusal to show me the power of attorney documents suggested they either didn't exist or contained forged signatures. "But I'd really like to see them," I pressed gently. "It might help me understand what's happening." "Antoinette," Bridget said firmly, "you're getting upset over nothing. The important thing is getting you proper care." "Am I getting upset?" I turned to her with apparent surprise. "I don't feel upset. I just want to understand." This simple statement seemed to unnerve all three of them. In their narrative, I should have been agitated, confused, possibly even combative. My calm rationality didn't fit their script of a woman in cognitive decline. "Perhaps," Dr. Harrison said, clearly eager to move the process along, "we should proceed with the arrangements. The sooner Mrs. Whitmore receives proper care, the better." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "I think Mrs. Whitmore should have a chance to review any documents before signing them." We all turned to see Jessa standing in the entrance to the living room, no longer carrying cleaning supplies or maintaining her submissive posture. She stood straight and confident, her entire demeanor transformed. "Excuse me," Conrad said sharply, "but this is a private family matter. Please return to your duties." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Whitmore," Jessa replied calmly, walking into the room. "You see, I've been recording this entire conversation, along with every other conversation you've had in this house for the past 2 months." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Harrison's face went pale. Conrad's mouth fell open, and Bridget actually took a step backward as if she'd been physically struck. "What are you talking about?" Conrad demanded, recovering his voice. You don't even speak English properly. Jessa smiled, and it wasn't the submissive expression they were accustomed to seeing. I speak English perfectly, Mr. Whitmore. I also have degrees in criminal justice and forensic accounting. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm a licensed private investigator. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen. Suddenly, Conrad's voice filled the room. The sooner we get her declared incompetent, the sooner we can access the trust fund. $3 million, Bridget. That's enough to solve both our problems. Conrad lunged for the phone, but Jessa stepped smoothly away. That's just one of dozens of recordings I have, Mr. Whitmore. Would you like to hear the one where you discuss bribing Dr. Harrison? Or perhaps the conversation where you and your sister plan to split Mrs. Whitmore's inheritance after she's conveniently died from complications at Bridgewood? Dr. Harrison was already moving toward the door, but Jessa's next words stopped him cold. Dr. Marcus Harrison, license number 479862. You're not going anywhere until the police arrive. Police? Bridget shrieked. You can't call the police. This is a private matter. Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery of medical documents, and attempted kidnapping are hardly private matters, Jessa replied. Oh, and Dr. Harrison? I should mention that I've already forwarded copies of all my recordings to the State Medical Board. Your license to practice medicine will be revoked by the end of the week. Dr. Harrison's face had gone from pale to gray. This is entrapment. You can't use recordings made without consent. Actually, I can, Jessa cut him off. California is a one-party consent state, and Mrs. Whitmore gave me permission to record conversations in her own home. Everything I've captured is perfectly admissible in court. I stood up slowly, shedding the last vestiges of my confused, vulnerable act. Surprise, I said to Conrad and Bridget, my voice steady and clear. I've been recording you too. I reached into my blouse and pulled out the small recording device Jessa had given me. Every conversation, every medical consultation, every moment when you thought you were safe to plan my destruction, it's all here. Conrad's face cycled through several emotions: shock, rage, fear, and finally, something that looked like grudging respect. You knew, he said quietly. All along, you knew. I knew you were stealing from me, I replied. I knew you were lying to me. I knew you'd been poisoning me with sedatives disguised as vitamins. But I didn't know you were planning to have me murdered in a psychiatric facility until yesterday. Murdered? Bridget laughed shrilly. Don't be dramatic, Antoinette. We were trying to get you help. Help? I turned to face her fully. Bridget, I have recordings of you discussing how long it typically takes for patients to die at Bridgewood Manor. You researched the average life expectancy and calculated how long you'd have to wait for my death to appear natural. The look of pure hatred that crossed her face was more honest than any expression I'd seen from her in years. You have no idea what you've done, Conrad said, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just destroy our family? Ruin our lives? Our family? I laughed, and there was no humor in it. Conrad, you stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. You're criminals, and criminals face consequences. The sound of sirens in the distance made Dr. Harrison bolt for the door, but Jessa was ready for him. She stepped into his path, and when he tried to push past her, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back with professional efficiency. I told you, she said calmly as he writhed in her grip. You're not going anywhere. 3 police cars pulled into our driveway, followed by an ambulance and what looked like a detective's unmarked sedan. Through the front windows, I could see officers approaching the house with purposeful strides. Mrs. Whitmore, the lead officer said as Jessa opened the door. I'm Detective Rodriguez. We received a report of elder abuse and medical fraud in progress. That would be correct, I replied, my voice remarkably steady for someone whose entire life had just been turned upside down. I believe you'll want to speak with Dr. Harrison first. He's been attempting to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility. As the officers began reading rights and placing handcuffs, I watched 35 years of marriage dissolve before my eyes. Conrad kept looking at me as if he couldn't quite believe I'd outsmarted him. Bridget was crying, not from remorse, but from fury at being caught. "This isn't over," Conrad said as the officers led him toward the door. "You'll regret this, Antoinette. Without me, you have nothing." I met his eyes one last time. "Conrad, I have something you never understood the value of. I have my dignity, I have my freedom, and now I have justice." As the police cars disappeared down Magnolia Drive with my husband, sister-in-law, and the corrupt doctor in custody, I stood in my foyer next to the woman who had saved my life. The grandfather clock chimed 5 times, marking the end of one chapter of my existence and the beginning of another. "What happens now?" I asked Jessa. "Now," she said, her professional demeanor softening into something that looked like genuine friendship. "You get to decide who Antoinette Whitmore really is when she's free to make her own choices." 6 months later, I stood in the same living room where Dr. Harrison had tried to destroy my life. But everything had changed. The heavy velvet curtains that Conrad had insisted on were gone, replaced by airy white linens that let the California sunshine flood every corner. The oppressive antique furniture had been donated to charity, replaced by comfortable pieces I'd chosen myself. The first furniture purchases I'd made in over 3 decades. The transformation of my home mirrored the transformation of my life. "Mrs. Whitmore," my lawyer, Sarah Chen, said as she set down her briefcase on the glass coffee table I'd selected specifically because it was nothing like the heavy mahogany Conrad preferred. "I have the final sentencing reports." I settled into my new favorite armchair, a soft blue piece that faced the windows instead of the television Conrad had always controlled. Jessa, or Jessica as I now called her, sat nearby, no longer my employee but my business partner and closest friend. "Conrad received 15 years for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder," Sarah continued. "The prosecution was able to prove that he'd been systematically draining your trust fund for over 10 years, taking nearly $800,000 for his failed business ventures and gambling debts." $800,000. Money my parents had saved and invested, expecting it to provide security for their daughter. Instead, it had funded Conrad's lies and Bridget's addiction while I lived on a careful budget, believing we were conserving our resources. "Bridget got 12 years, Sarah continued. Her cooperation with the prosecution helped expose the larger network. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she'd participated in elder abuse schemes. She's been running similar cons on wealthy widows for years, using her social connections to gain access to vulnerable women." I nodded, unsurprised. Bridget's practiced efficiency at manipulation had suggested extensive experience. "And Dr. Harrison?" 20 years, and his medical license is permanently revoked. He'd falsified competency evaluations for at least a dozen other victims over the past 5 years. The FBI is still investigating the full scope of his operations. 20 years seemed appropriate for a man who'd perverted the trust that should exist between doctor and patient. His victims included elderly women like me, but also adults with disabilities whose families wanted them institutionalized for convenience, and even some cases involving inheritance disputes where inconvenient relatives needed to disappear. "The civil settlements are finalized as well," Sarah added, pulling out another set of documents. "Between Conrad's hidden assets, Bridget's insurance policies, and the malpractice claims against Dr. Harrison's practice, you'll recover approximately $1.2 million beyond your original inheritance. $1,200,000, compensation for the years of abuse, manipulation, and attempted murder." It felt surreal to put a monetary value on betrayal, but the money would serve a better purpose than justice. It would fund the future I was finally free to choose. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, her expression growing serious. "Conrad's attorney contacted me yesterday. He wants to arrange a meeting." "Absolutely not," Jessica said immediately. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't need to subject herself to more manipulation. I considered this for a moment. 6 months ago, the thought of facing Conrad would have terrified me. Now it simply felt unnecessary. What could he possibly want? According to his attorney, he wants to apologize. He claims prison has given him perspective on what he did to you. I laughed, a sound that still surprised me with its freedom. Conrad doesn't apologize. He strategizes. He's probably hoping for a reduced sentence or early parole. Tell his attorney that Antoinette Whitmore is too busy living her life to waste time on his regrets. Sarah made notes, smiling at my response. Over the past months, she'd watched me evolve from a victim into someone who refused to be diminished by anyone else's expectations. After Sarah left, Jessica and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon light play across our transformed space. The woman who'd saved my life had become so much more than I'd ever imagined possible. "I have news," Jessica said finally, pulling out her own set of documents. The Martinez-Whitmore Investigative Agency officially received its license yesterday. Our business, a private investigation firm specializing in elder abuse and financial fraud, was finally official. Jessica's expertise combined with my intimate understanding of how these predators operated would help protect other vulnerable people from what I'd experienced. "Our first case?" I asked. A 73-year-old woman in San Francisco. Her son and daughter-in-law are slowly isolating her and taking control of her finances. The pattern is identical to what Conrad and Bridget did to you. The familiar anger flickered in my chest, but it was no longer helpless rage. It was fuel for action. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, if you're ready." I looked around my bright, airy living room, at the photographs of my parents that I'd retrieved from storage and displayed prominently for the first time in decades. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, confused, isolated, slowly being poisoned by the people who claimed to love me. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, clear-minded, purposeful, and determined to protect others from similar fates. "I'm ready," I said. That evening, I prepared dinner in my kitchen, a simple meal that I chose, cooked, and seasoned to my own taste. No hidden sedatives, no mysterious stomach ailments afterward. Just food that nourished rather than controlled. As I set the table for one, I reflected on how much my definition of independence had changed. 6 months ago, I would have seen eating alone as evidence of failure, proof that I'd driven away the people who mattered. Now, I understood it as evidence of choice, the ability to decide how I wanted to spend my time and with whom. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my meal. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding an enormous bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flower, though Conrad had always insisted roses were more elegant. The card read, "Congratulations on your new business venture. You're going to save so many lives. With love and admiration, Dr. Sarah Chen." Dr. Chen, the neurologist who'd conducted a real evaluation of my cognitive function, proving definitively that I was mentally competent and had never shown any signs of dementia. Her testimony had been crucial in securing Conrad and Bridget's convictions. I arranged the sunflowers in a crystal vase that had been my mother's, placing them on the dining room table where they caught the last rays of afternoon sun. Their bright faces turned toward the light seemed like a metaphor for the direction my life had taken, always reaching for warmth and growth, no longer trapped in shadow. Later that night, I sat in my study, the room that had once been my sanctuary from Conrad's control and was now simply my office. I opened my laptop and began drafting our agency's mission statement, words flowing easily as I described our commitment to protecting vulnerable adults from financial abuse and exploitation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Proud to be your partner in this new adventure. Tomorrow we begin saving lives." I smiled and typed back, "Tomorrow we begin living." As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the 73-year-old woman in San Francisco who didn't yet know that help was coming. Tomorrow, Jessica and I would begin the work of exposing another family's greed and protecting another vulnerable person from the kind of systematic abuse I'd endured. The cycle would end with us, one case at a time, one saved life at a time. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.